Hey friends, I've got another process video for you today, and this layout is based on a sketch challenge. The photo is right there, and Paige Evans posted this in her Happy Scrappy Facebook group. And if you haven't joined her Happy Scrappy place on Facebook yet, go check it out. It's so much fun, lots of inspiration, and I got inspired by this sketch challenge that Paige posted. So I'm starting by just cutting a bunch of red, white, and blue papers into 2-inch squares. And I have an array of red and white and blue papers because I'm going to make a 4th of July layout. So I just finished up cutting up my squares, and now I'm going to cut them in half into triangles. And this is just a perfect layout for using up your stash, just any papers you have. 2 inches isn't very big, so you can use up tiny little scraps and make a fun layout. So I end up not using that red and white striped paper, but I am going to start assembling my heart. And I'm looking at my sketch image because my spatial reasoning skills are non-existent. So I'm looking at that and just mimicking it and trying to spread out the colors so that there aren't any patterns or colors too close to each other. And I love the quilty look of this. I actually am also a quilter, and so anything I can make that is quilty or quilt inspired, I just love. So I'm really excited about this challenge. So I've almost got my heart assembled, and I know that I want to add some stitching to each of these triangles. That's one of the things that's on the sketch challenge as well. So I'm going to just lightly adhere them down. But first, I'm going to do some mixed media. There were some splatters on the sketch, and so I'm taking some Lindy's Magical Powders. This is the color Blueberry Streusel Blue. At least I think that's what it's called. And if you have watched any of my other videos, you know by now that all of my mixed media attempts take at least 2 tries. And so this is attempt number 1, and I end up not liking it, so I might save it for another layout because I do like the idea of watercoloring through the stencil and spraying it with water afterward to kind of mess it up. I think it turned out pretty cool. It just was too busy with all of my little paper triangles. So attempt number 1, as usual, is going to be going in the trash. And this is where I decide to throw it out because I start putting my triangles back on and I realize it's just too busy and I don't like it. So it doesn't take long for me to decide that I need to either save this for another layout or just get rid of it. So I'm going to come back in with just some splatters. And I'm using 2 sizes of paintbrushes here. One of them creates kind of a bigger outward spray, and then the smaller one creates smaller splatters or bigger splatters, I mean. So I'm rolling over it with a paper towel just so that it doesn't dry too dark. I want it to be the right shade of blue, and rolling the paper towels over the page works really well for kind of lining it up. And this looks much less busy in the end with all of my triangles back on. So I like this mixed media attempt much better. So I'm going to put my triangles all back on, and you've seen me do this before, so I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. In a minute here, we'll move on to the next stage, and through the magic of editing, the heart will be complete. So a few more triangles here, adjusting them to make sure the spacing is right. And there's the finished triangle, or the finished heart. And I'm just marking the center with my ruler there, the center of the page, and moving everything up a little bit to make sure it's centered on my layout. And here's where I'm going to start adhering things with my tape roller. And like I said, I am planning on adding machine stitching, so I don't need a very strong adhesive here, just enough to hold it in place until I sew it on permanently. And again, I'm not going to make you watch this whole thing because that would be super boring. So through the magic of editing, my stitching is all done. I think it looks so good. It's a little wonky, but that's okay. And next, I'm going to ruffle up the edges. I'm experimenting with this border paper again, and the top and bottom are a little thicker than the sides, so I am going to trim that down later. But first I'm going to ruffle up the edges of all these triangles. And I could have distressed the edges before, but I felt like it worked just as well to do it after the stitching. So I'm just using my fingernail and rotating the page so I can either go up or down, and that makes it a little bit easier than going side to side. And I think those distressed edges look super fun. And now I just stitched along the edges of that border as well, ruffling up the edges there, and that just adds so much texture, and I love it. For even more texture, we're gonna add some hand stitching. And I just was experimenting with my navy thread there, and I like that color. And I'm using I think it's technically a weeding tool from Cricut, but I use it as a paper piercer, and it works great for punching holes for hand stitching. And I set it on a wool pressing mat. It's actually a tool that I use for quilting as well. But because it's soft, it works really well for punching those holes in my paper. So you just saw me tie a knot there. One of the easiest ways to do it is to wrap the thread around your finger and then just roll your thumb over it, and that creates a nice little knot. And I'm going to use just a basic running stitch here, which means I'm going to come up the first hole, down the next hole, up the next hole, down the next hole, and so on and so forth. Just a bunch of up and down, really simple, nothing fancy, but I wanted it to look really, I don't know, just like hand stitching would look on a quilt. So that's why I'm doing a running stitch. And I'm using all 6 strands of that navy thread. It's just regular old DMC embroidery floss. And we're gonna speed it up here, stitch it even faster. Again, I'm just going up through one hole and then down the next hole, up the next hole, down the next hole. And this didn't take very long because it's not a very complicated stitch and it's not a lot of hand stitching. So this was actually pretty quick, but I do love the detail and the texture that it adds. I think it ends up looking super pretty. And we'll see the final stitching in a sec here. There it is. And I cut that love on my Cricut in navy paper, and I tried coloring these foam thickers, but it didn't absorb the color at all. So we're just gonna stick with white letters. And I wanted to have the word love on here because it's a heart, but I wanted to tie it into my Independence Day theme. So it's gonna say Land That I Love, which is, you know, from a patriotic song that I don't remember the name of off the top of my head right now, but that's okay. Anyway, these are my photos. I love that my daughter's holding a flag in these photos, and my husband's wearing blue and my daughter's wearing red, so the colors totally tie into the theme I'm going with. And this was at a 4th of July parade. So I'm just putting a little bit of white paper behind my photos to help them stand out from all this color. And I wanted to add something more round and organic to this page, which is why I did the cursive love, but it needs something a little bit more to add to that organic feel to contrast with the sharp angles of all those triangles. So I'm using this red and white floral paper from the Paige Evans Splendid collection. And I got that from the project pad at Joann. And I just fussy cut out some flowers. And I'm also going to come in with some stamping. So I'm practicing on a scrap piece of paper, and I'm going to add some navy stars to the layout. And I'm going to do this in 3 areas to create that visual triangle. And I'm doing clusters of 3 stars. So odd numbers tend to look visually appealing. So got some stars there, and really I think the layout could have done without these. I don't think it really needs them, but too late now. Adding some flowers, and those are going to go in kind of in a diagonal line from where the 2 photos meet on both sides. And now I'm going to start gluing everything down. I am going to reinforce those white thickers with some liquid glue just to make sure that they don't pop off the page later. And I'm using the Barely Art glue. It has a really nice fine tip, which I love. And it's a pretty sturdy glue too. I haven't had too many problems with it. So I'm just adding some kids craft foam behind some of the flowers and behind my photos. I just want to make them really pop off the page and add some dimension to this layout. And we are almost done here. The final images are going to come up in just a sec. And this is actually part 1 of 2. This is going to end up being a 2-page spread. I've got a close-up here, and I've also got a bonus layout. I made an 8.5 by 11 version for my daughter's scrapbook right there. And you can see how I use the same technique, but it's a totally different look with that dark background. So again, here's the sketch that I used, and remember to check out part 2 of this layout, and I will leave a link to that below. So go check out part 2 and have a scrappy day.